This was one of the first sounds I ever heard in gaming. From the StarCraft 1 soundtrack to the navigation menu and all the way to my first mission, this was my introduction to the gaming world. I remember it well. 7-year-old me was in the living room of a friend's house on their family computer, and my buddy decided to show me his new game. Little did I know the influence this title would have on me, and taking one look at my channel, it'll quickly become apparent this is one of my all-time favorite franchises. But I'm not alone here. I was one of millions. StarCraft 1 and Brood War, during their rise to popularity, had the gaming world in a chokehold, particularly in South Korea. Even as late as 2019, StarCraft had its peak viewership on Twitch at almost 137,000 viewers. And while that peak was 6 years ago, that's still rather impressive for a game that came out in 1998. And it got me thinking, how did this game get so popular? What caused StarCraft to become such a phenomenon that we find ourselves talking about it all the way from the late 90s to today? Of course, there are many potential factors to discuss around a topic like this, ranging from personal opinions, like my own, all the way to historical anomalies. And in this video, we'll break down a few of the topics that I think are worth discussing. To fully appreciate StarCraft's impact, we gotta go back to the mid-90s when online gaming was just coming of age. The days of digital purchases via online vendors weren't yet a thing, and back in the late 90s and early 2000s, most of our games were hard copies purchased on CDs or plastic cartridges. Here are just a few I could find in my basement, all of which haven't seen the light of day in at least a decade. Back then, playing video games with someone outside your home was neither easy nor common. The internet was young and slow, and most games only supported local or direct connections. Ambitious early titles gave glimpses of the future. For example, Doom in 1993 popularized deathmatch gameplay over local networks, and gamers would lug their PCs to LAN parties to blast each other in Doom and later Quake in 1996. These LAN gatherings hinted at the thrill of multiplayer competition, but playing over the wider internet was still hard and often frustratingly novel. In the mid-90s, most home users were on dial-up modems, and some services like AOL charged by the hour. To this day, the dial-up tune still haunts me in my dreams. There were a few pioneering games, notably text-based MUDs in the 80s and the first graphical MMORPGs by the late 90s, like Ultima Online in 97, which proved thousands could adventure together in one world. But for most gamers, early online play involved third-party services. Platforms like Kali, MPlayer, 10, and Microsoft's MSN Gaming Zone sprang up to connect players, most of which were before my time. These services essentially tricked games into thinking they were on a LAN or matched players via chat lobbies, since many games lacked built-in internet play. In short, competitive online gaming was possible but clunky. It was waiting for a breakthrough. A game and service that could bring everyone together easily. This is the backdrop against which StarCraft emerged, and is part of the reason why its arrival was so revolutionary. While online multiplayer was gaining traction globally in the late 90s, South Korea was uniquely poised to embrace it. In the wake of economic reforms and a tech-focused vision, South Korea invested heavily in telecommunications infrastructure. The government's ambitious policies and deregulation efforts led to a rapid rollout of broadband internet across the country. The first affordable broadband services for consumers became available around 1998, coincidentally the year that StarCraft was released, and growth exploded shortly thereafter. To put this into perspective, by 2001, South Korea led the world in broadband services, nearly 10 broadband connections per 100 people, far ahead of the roughly 2 per 100 in the US at that time. In practical terms, this meant that South Korean internet users were experiencing speeds and always-on connections that were a generation ahead of many other countries. Government and industry played a leading role in this transition, treating internet access as a strategic priority and rapidly wiring cities with high-speed links. Just as important, connectivity wasn't only at home. A new kind of social space was emerging, the PC Bang or PC Room, the Korean internet cafes. These venues, which we'll explore in depth later, were equipped with fast internet and networks well before most households. In the late 90s, if you wanted high-speed online gaming in South Korea, you went to PC Bang. The synergy between widespread broadband, government support, and a growing network of PC gaming cafes created the perfect environment for an online multiplayer game to catch fire. StarCraft arrived at just the right moment to ride this wave. It's hard to overstate how differently the world came online. Globally, internet access was uneven, as was the type of access. Sure, North America and parts of Europe got online earlier than some other countries, but the catch was this was through dial-up connections that were slow and unstable for gaming. In contrast, places like South Korea leapfrogged directly to broadband around the year 2000, enabling new uses like online gaming much more readily. In Europe and North America, the culture slowly shifted from console gaming towards online play, notably with the explosion of MMORPGs such as EverQuest and World of Warcraft, as well as online shooters like Counter-Strike. But unlike in South Korea, online gaming wasn't yet a mainstream social phenomenon in the West, at least not yet. When StarCraft landed in 1998, followed by its expansion Brood War later that year, it wasn't just another PC game. It was a revelation in game design. Perhaps the most lauded aspect was the introduction of 3 completely distinct yet balanced, races, which we all know and love, or hate. StarCraft featured the Terran, Zerg, and Protoss, all of which share no units in common and required wildly different playstyles with varying levels of learning curves, which is why I main Protoss. I know, roast me in the comments below. But subscribe to me while you're at it. As one review noted, unlike most RTS games with multiple races, StarCraft's races do not have any equivalent units. In fact, the very method of base building and waging war is completely different for each race. This asymmetry gave the game incredible depth. Learning to master one race alone was already a challenge, but learning to contend with all 3 was an ever-evolving strategic puzzle. Crucially, Blizzard achieved a rare and sometimes questionable game balance where each faction felt powerful, yet had a clear and distinct vision. There was no ultimate unit that guaranteed victory, not even the mothership in the later StarCraft 2 game, which I'm still mad about them nerfing by the way. Even the so-called weakest units, Marines, Zealots, and Zerglings had important roles in the game, although the decision to make the Marine ranged, with the ability to shoot up and down was questionable, and not at all related to my bias as a dirty Protoss player. Now outside of balance, the single-player experience in itself was a triumph. StarCraft's campaign wove a compelling narrative across 3 chapters, one for each race, with memorable characters and plot twists, and also served as a way for players to familiarize themselves with the game. The story started in familiar sci-fi territory, Humans vs. Aliens, a classic, but quickly subverted expectations with political intrigue, betrayal, and character complexity even among the non-human factions. The infamous fall of Kerrigan from hero to vengeful Zerg Queen is a trend that will never get old to me. The mission design was also varied and challenging, at least for my 7-year-old self. Objectives ranged from straightforward base conquest to survival, keeping players on their toes and requiring 7-year-old me to run the game with power overwhelming on in virtually every mission. And between those missions, the campaign was carried by atmospheric briefings and, for the time, excellent cutscenes which became the bread and butter for Blizzard even to this day, despite the fact that they may have lost their touch in game development since those early days.
Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
From its launch, StarCraft was met with critical acclaim and commercial success. It wasn't an overnight phenomenon everywhere, but word of mouth and strong reviews spread the good word of StarCraft rapidly. By the end of the 1990s, it was clear Blizzard had a juggernaut. The game and its expansion would go on to sell over 11 million copies worldwide. This was a staggering number for a PC strategy title, especially for the time. More importantly, StarCraft established itself as the gold standard of RTS game design, and a platform upon which an entire culture of competitive gaming would be built. A major factor in StarCraft's global success was not just the game itself, but how people played it together. This is where Blizzard's BattleNet changed everything. Launched in early 1997 alongside Diablo, BattleNet was a built-in online matchmaking and chat service. In fact, it was my very first chat room sort of experience. I'd find myself spending almost as much time trolling in BattleNet as I did actually playing the game. Effectively, BattleNet was a sort of precursor to modern platforms like Steam or Xbox Live, but dedicated to Blizzard games. With StarCraft, BattleNet really hit its stride and transformed the multiplayer experience. Rob Bridenbecker, a Blizzard veteran, recalled that during Warcraft's 2 heyday, players were already tinkering with services like Kali, mPlayer, and even Westwood Chat to get online. That inspired Blizzard. How cool would it be if we could create a network integrated with our products such that people could connect, chat, and play with one click? And that's exactly what BattleNet delivered. One-click online play without needing external software. With StarCraft, a player could log on to BattleNet, browse chat lobbies, add friends, and jump into matches or custom games effortlessly. This ease of use was revolutionary at the time, making online play accessible to the masses. Equally revolutionary was Blizzard's decision to make BattleNet free for everyone. In the late 90s and early 2000s, many online services like MMORPGs or third-party networks charged fees. BattleNet, by contrast, was an open arena. If you owned the game and had an internet connection, you could play online without any subscription. This dramatically lowered the barrier for global competition. By removing friction, Blizzard allowed StarCraft's multiplayer community to explode in size. In many ways, BattleNet felt like stepping into the future. Even the kid version of me could tell it was something special. It provided players profiles, chat channels, and matchmaking long before those features became a standard. In 1998, BattleNet felt like an almost sci-fi experience. playing the game in real time against somebody across the world and then chatting about the match after, all within the game's interface, was something new and exhilarating. This service essentially laid the foundation for modern online gaming networks, and it's widely credited with helping StarCraft and other Blizzard titles build dedicated online communities, and although it has nowhere near the reach of Steam being a Blizzard service, it's cool to think about its legacy. In hindsight, Battle.net was StarCraft's sort of secret weapon. It turned a great RTS into a limitless social and competitive platform. Players could hone their skills against players worldwide, share strategies, and form clans, setting the stage for the emergence of true esports. Now, we can't really talk about StarCraft's success without turning our attention back to South Korea. One of the more fascinating historical quirks that enabled StarCraft's dominance in South Korea was the absence of Japanese consoles and games in the 90s. Due to decades-old restrictions, South Korea had effectively banned the import of Japanese media and electronics following World War II. This was a cultural protection measure rooted in a painful history of Japanese occupation. This meant that throughout the 80s and much of the 90s, products like Nintendo and Sony consoles as well as their games were not officially available in South Korea. Of course, some consoles made their way through gray markets or under different branding. For instance, Hyundai Electronics licensed the NES from Nintendo and sold it as the Hyundai Comboy in Korea in the late 80s. During the critical period of 1998 through 2001 when StarCraft rose to prominence, consoles were still effectively absent or just beginning to trickle in South Korea. This created a perfect storm of opportunity for a PC game to capture the market. As a Gosu Gamers article later observed, old trade restrictions with Japan made consoles traditionally hard to come by, making PC the natural gaming machine. Basically, Blizzard is the only Western gaming company that has a strong foothold in Korea. In other words, Korean gamers who might have otherwise been playing Nintendo or PlayStation titles were instead crowding into PC rooms and playing PC games. And Blizzard's titles like Diablo and StarCraft face much less competition for gamers' attention. StarCraft, with its rich gameplay and excellent Korean localization, entered the console-sized void in the market. It's a striking example of how historical and cultural factors can shape entertainment trends. A legal ban on Japanese games inadvertently helped non-Japanese IPs like StarCraft become mega hits in South Korea. By the time Nintendo and Sony fully arrived in the mid-2000s, StarCraft and PC gaming had already cemented themselves as staples of Korean gaming culture. Now, remember those internet cafes I mentioned? Picture this. It's 1999 in Seoul, and down a neon-lit side street, there's a basement filled with rows of computers all running StarCraft. The air is thick with cigarette smoke, back then at least, and excited chatter. Dozens of gamers sit shoulder to shoulder, eyes glued to their screens as armies of Zerg and Protoss clash across the monitors. This was the scene of the PC Bang, the Korean internet cafe, and it became the crucible in which StarCraft fandom was forged. PC bangs exploded in number alongside StarCraft's rise. In early 1998, there were only about 100 PC Bang venues in the entire country, mostly offering basic internet access. But once StarCraft landed, PC Bangs transformed into gaming hubs. By 1999, there were over 15,000 PC Bangs across Korea, an absolutely insane 150 times increase in just 1 year. And by the end of 2002, that count jumped up to 23,000. This literal Big Bang expansion was directly tied to the appetite for online gaming, and StarCraft was the game drawing people in. Early PC Bang patrons were predominantly students and young adults who might not have had high-end PCs or broadband at home. These cafes gave them affordable and fast access to satisfy their StarCraft cravings. As one academic study noted, most importantly, most Korean users were first exposed to high-speed access to the web in PC Bangs. They became so accustomed to using high-speed services that dial-up at home felt inadequate. In other words, PC Bangs not only let gamers play StarCraft the way it was meant to be played, lag-free and socially, but they also trained a generation to expect fast internet, which in turn drove demand for broadband in homes. The relationship between StarCraft and PC Bangs was deeply symbiotic. PC Bang owners quickly realized that gamers would stay for hours if they were immersed in an epic multiplayer match. In fact, the craze for StarCraft and other online games fundamentally changed the business model for PC Bangs. Instead of quick 30-minute uses to check email or print something, customers began spending their entire evenings or nights gaming. A Chungong daily article, forgive me for that pronunciation, recounts that PC Bang businesses initially didn't even sell food or drinks because people didn't stay long. With StarCraft, players might play match after match, often cooperating or maybe even trash talking with friends in person. The PC Bang became a social clubhouse of sorts. Friends would gather after school to maybe play 2v2 matches or take turns on the 1v1 ladder, and spectators could stand behind players to watch exciting games, so even those not chasing ladder ranks could have fun. Importantly, the PC Bang hourly fee PC model made gaming affordable and widespread. You didn't even need to buy the game. The cafe provided it. This meant StarCraft reached many who might not have otherwise played it, further fueling its popularity. By the early 2000s, PC bangs were a fixture of Korean urban life, and StarCraft was synonymous with their success. The image of rows of Korean gamers immersed in StarCraft matches became iconic. In sum, StarCraft and the PC bang culture rose together, each propelling the other. The game gave PC bangs an avenue that kept customers coming back, and the PC bangs gave StarCraft the perfect distribution and play environment to become a national obsession. What happened next in South Korea was something the world had never quite seen before. Video game players turning into televised sports stars. And StarCraft was at the heart of this transformation, essentially laying out the foundation of modern esports. The timeline is remarkable. In 1999, just a year after StarCraft's release, there were already tournaments being held. That year saw the first StarCraft League broadcast on TV, the Tooniverse Pro Gamer Korea Open 1999, which drew enough interest that a cable channel decided to dedicate itself to gaming. By the year 2000, OnGameNet, or OGN, was launched as a 24/7 gaming television channel with StarCraft as its flagship content, and soon after, NBC Game joined the party. This meant by the early 2000s, South Korea cable was airing professional StarCraft matches regularly, complete with enthusiastic commentators, analysis, and fanfare. Something that was almost unimaginable in other countries at that time, for video games at least. Live tournaments also grew from small events to stadium-filling spectacles in a short span. By 2002, StarCraft was filling arenas. The watershed moment often cited is the 2002 Sky OnGameNet Star League, or OSL, finals. OnGameNet Star League was a major individual StarCraft league, and in the fall of 2002, its grand final between two star players, Boxer versus Oops, was held in a large venue. Organizers anticipated a good turnout, but even they were shocked when 15 to 20,000 fans showed up in person. This StarCraft Finals looked like a rock concert or a championship football match. It became clear at that point that esports, though the term was not widely used yet, had become a cultural phenomenon in Korea. As one write-up noted, the 2002 Sky OSL final was a turning point, proving that StarCraft had a broad enough appeal to draw spectators by the tens of thousands and even attract mainstream sponsors. Following these events, the StarCraft esports ecosystem blossomed. Professional teams were formed and sponsored by major corporations, giving rise to structured team leagues. Pro gamers in Korea attained a status previously unheard of for gamers. They became celebrities. Top players like Boxer were household names. Boxer in particular achieved superstar status as the charismatic Terran champion dubbed the Emperor. His popularity was so immense that when he had to fulfill the South Korea's mandatory military service, the Air Force literally formed a StarCraft team so that he and other pros could continue competing during service. I'm not making this up. This served as a real-life example of how gaming had permeated even national institutions. The prestige of winning a Star League championship was such that players were treated like sports champions, with trophy ceremonies, victory interviews, and even induction into esports halls of fame later on. One particularly famous event that illustrates the heights of StarCraft euphoria was the 2005 Sky Pro League Grand Final. An estimated 100,000 spectators gathered on a beach to watch two teams duel, with a rock concert and fireworks mixed in with the match. The StarCraft-fueled esports boom also had a global ripple effect. It inspired the creation of international events like the World Cyber Games, or WCG, which debuted in Seoul in the year 2000 as an esports Olympics. This brought players from many countries to compete, and often with the South Koreans dominating StarCraft brackets. It also showed game developers and broadcasters worldwide that competitive gaming could be a spectator's sport. Meanwhile, in the United States and elsewhere, competitive gaming was far more underground in the early 2000s. Western gamers, via the internet, gradually caught wind of the Korean scene, with some tuning into shaky online streams or downloaded VODs of legendary matches and getting in on the frenzy. South Korea had effectively become the mecca of esports, and StarCraft was its crown jewel, often called Korea's national sport by journalists. In many ways, it was StarCraft and South Korea's frenzy around it that laid the groundwork for esports. By building a competitive scene with complex leagues, teams, and prizes, StarCraft proved that a video game could engage viewers like traditional sports. This set the template for all future esports. And by the early 2000s, it was evident that South Korea's gaming culture had taken a very different path than that of the United States and much of the West. In South Korea, StarCraft wasn't just a game, it was a social phenomenon, a sport, and even a point of national pride. Pro gamers were celebrated, TV networks dedicated long hours of programming to matches, and gamers flocked to PC bangs to emulate their heroes. In contrast, in the United States during that same period, gaming largely remained more of a private or casual entertainment activity. The dominant images of gaming in the West were a world apart. American kids like myself traded Pokemon cards and tuned into Saturday morning cartoons of Pokemon or Dragon Ball Z. Basically, iconic gaming moments of the West in the late 90s included a Game Boy and a Pokemon game, and later Halo for the Xbox in 2001, of course. So while South Korean teenagers idolized StarCraft pro players, Americans were more likely to recognize characters like Mario or Pikachu. This was largely a factor of the continued dominance of consoles in the US. In the early 2000s, the PlayStation, Xbox, and GameCube were the centerpiece of many households. And as we mentioned earlier, in South Korea, consoles were late to arrive and never became as entrenched. Instead, PC gaming filled that space. And thus we see a divergence. South Korea had a PC-centric, multiplayer-centric gaming culture, whereas the US had a more console-centric, single-player-focused, and casual gaming culture. However, South Korea's embrace of esports eventually did begin to creep, get it, into the West as well. By the mid-2000s, some American channels like the short-lived G4 TV, anybody remember that one, experimented with showing gaming events and tournaments like MLG, which brought StarCraft and other games to Western audiences. But back in StarCraft's golden era, the prestige gap was huge. A Korean pro gamer could have a career and fame, whereas a US StarCraft player, no matter how skilled, had little infrastructure to go pro in the same way. Cultural priorities were different. To give an analogy, in South Korea, StarCraft matches might be shown in sports bars and talked about in mainstream media, whereas in the US, that role was occupied by things like the latest NFL games or the World Series. Video games were still seen as toys or niche hobbies, not spectator events. In the States, the biggest gaming-related crowd might have been at E3 or a console launch event, not watching people play an RTS competitively. It wouldn't be until the 2010s that Western esports scenes would catch up. StarCraft highlights how two cultures can take the same medium, video games, and elevate them to different statuses. South Korea turned gaming into a highly social, competitive public entertainment scene, while the US treated gaming as entertainment software for private consumption for much longer. These paths would converge as global esports took off, but during the era of Brood War, the Korean experience diverged dramatically from the American one, at least in the beginning. After a decade of StarCraft reigning as titan of RTS and esports, anticipation was sky high for a sequel. In July 2010, Blizzard released StarCraft II: Wings of Liberty, and it immediately built upon the original's rich legacy while also modernizing the franchise for a new generation. In many ways, StarCraft II had big shoes to fill. It was not only the follow-up of a beloved game, but also a successor to an entire esports ecosystem. Blizzard did approach it with that in mind, and upon release, StarCraft II was met with critical acclaim. Indeed, Blizzard consciously tried to make StarCraft II friendly for competitive play, including better matchmaking, extensive post-game stats, and observer features for broadcasting. From a commercial standpoint, StarCraft II was a huge success. It sold extremely fast out of the gate, over 1 million copies on day one, and more than 1.5 million within 48 hours, making it the fastest-selling strategy game of all time at launch. It topped PC game sales charts in North America, Europe, and of course, South Korea. Within a month, it had passed 3 million copies sold. This strong sales performance showed that StarCraft's appeal indeed had become global, fueled by longtime fans and newcomers curious about the hype. Notably, by 2010, the gaming world outside Korea had changed. Broadband internet was common in the West, and services like Blizzard's new Battle.net 2.0 and platforms like Steam had made online gaming mainstream. StarCraft II benefited from this environment, launching in 11 languages and on 5 continents simultaneously. Crucially, Blizzard also aimed to expand the esports narrative with StarCraft II. Within months of release, StarCraft II tournaments were setting records. In South Korea, GSL began in late 2010, offering massive prize pools and for the first time inviting not just Koreans, but also top foreign players to compete side by side in Seoul. Meanwhile, in the West, organizations like MLG featured StarCraft II as a headlining game, drawing tens of thousands of online viewers. In fact, for a few years, StarCraft II was arguably the most visible esport worldwide. An industry analysis noted that in the early 2010s, StarCraft II had more prize money awarded in a few months than Brood War did in most of its peak years. Thanks to Blizzard's support and new international tournaments, it quickly ascended to having the largest prize pool and viewership in esports before games like Dota and League of Legends later overtook it. One of StarCraft II's major contributions to global esports was how it helped popularize streaming. The rise of StarCraft II coincided with the launch of Twitch in mid-2011, and indeed, StarCraft II was the game that drove early Twitch viewership. Fans around the world could easily watch GSL matches or foreign tournaments online, no longer limited to local TV networks. English commentary of Korean matches became common, bridging the once wide gap between Korean pros and foreign fans. StarCraft 2 built upon the drama of the original scene. Old legends like Boxer came out of retirement to compete alongside a new generation of pro gamers, creating storylines that enthralled longtime followers. It also fostered a truly international competition. Players from Europe, the Americas, and China rose to challenge the traditionally dominant South Koreans. This made the esport more globally engaging. For example, when foreign players like Canada's Huck made deep runs in Korean GSL tournaments, or when tournaments like IPL and DreamHack featured East versus West showdowns, it galvanized the worldwide interest. On top of continuing the campaign, each expansion also introduced new units and tweaks that kept multiplayer evolving, much as Brood War had done for the original. By the mid-2010s, StarCraft 2 had carved out its own legacy of the void, not identical to Brood Wars, but significant in its own right. It wasn't quite the national obsession in Korea that the original had been. The esports landscape in South Korea had diversified to other games by then, but it was still very successful, and it massively grew the StarCraft esports fan base in North America and Europe. For years, StarCraft 2 was the highest paying and most watched esport globally. StarCraft 2 built upon the colossal foundation of StarCraft 1 in many ways. Technologically, it brought the franchise up to modern standards, and culturally, it carried forward the competitive spirit and then spread it even wider across the globe. It demonstrated that the magic of StarCraft, a game equally enjoyable for its gameplay depth and for the spectacle that it creates, could endure across generations. I would say as of 2025, while other esports have surged, the StarCraft franchise maintains a revered spot in gaming history. The original StarCraft showed what was possible, and StarCraft 2 confirmed that those possibilities were sustainable and scalable to a worldwide stage. The legacy of StarCraft is not just in the game design textbooks or sales charts, but in the vibrant esports world we see today. A world that it helped spawn, one 6 pool or bunker rush at a time. Or Cannon Rush.